Welcome to Moonlit Romantic, a place where love stories glow softly in the quiet of night, guiding you toward rest and dreams. Tonight's story is Snowflakes and Second Chances. Holly Bennett has poured her heart into Sweet Hearth Bakery, a place of warmth, memory, and sugar-dusted joy in her snowy mountain town. With the holiday festival fast approaching, Holly is determined to make this season her brightest yet. But when Nicholas Carter, her first love, and her heartbreak, returns as the festival's new sponsor, old wounds and long-buried feelings rise like snowdrifts in her path. Under twinkling lights, gingerbread roofs, and the hush of falling snow, Holly must decide if love lost can find its way back home. So settle in, breathe deep, and let the story begin. Chapter 1: Sugar and Snow. The morning opened like a song at Sweet Hearth Bakery, soft and warm, with notes of cinnamon rising through the air and a chorus of quiet clinks as Holly Bennett set out her favorite mixing bowls. Outside, the mountain town drowsed beneath a sky the color of pewter. You could feel snow waiting there, the way a hush gathers in a theater just before the lights dim. Inside, however, everything shone. The front windows wore garlands of cedar and twinkling lights. The glass fogged at their corners from the breath of ovens, and the old bell above the door chimed its gentle hello when early regulars slipped in from the cold. Holly tied on her grandmother's flour-dusted apron, smoothed the faded embroidery of a holly sprig, and breathed in the room that had raised her. The bakery had been hers since her grandmother passed it down with a kiss and a tin of handwritten recipe cards, tied with red ribbon. That ribbon still lived in the recipe box because Holly could not bear to tuck it away. On quiet afternoons, she would run her finger along its soft edge and hear her grandmother's voice. A good bakery keeps two promises, sweetheart. One to memory, one to joy. She thought of both promises as she whisked cocoa powder into a satin ribbon of melted chocolate, steam curling up like a secret. The town's holiday festival was mere days away, and she intended to keep every promise twice over. Gingerbread houses lined the work table like a charming street, each little house waiting for a sugared roof and a dusting of edible snow. The hot cocoa stand sign leaned against a sack of flour, its hand-painted letters still drying. Sweet Hearth Cocoa. 2 marshmallows or 3, just say when. She had made the sign herself after midnight, laughing at her own perfectionism, then laughing again because she really did need to repaint a single letter that had smudged. "Morning, Holly girl," Mr. Lynn called from the door, bringing a curl of cold air with him and the familiar creak of his cane. "Smells like happiness going to work." "Good morning," she said, smiling as she slid a tray of croissants into the oven. "Your usual?" 2 cinnamon rolls, warm if the universe is in the mood," he said. eyes twinkling under his knit cap. The universe and I have an understanding. She plaited the rolls, drizzled glaze in soft ribbons, then added a third, smaller one. For the road, you and your grandmother, he mused, accepting the extra with mock gravity, always giving away the best parts. That is how they come back around, she said, handing over his coffee. After he settled at his favorite table by the window, Holly turned back to the day's list. The festival committee had promised a final email this morning containing booth assignments and the schedule for the gingerbread contest. She wiped her hands and woke the old laptop on the counter, its screen cheerfully insisting it had survived too many flower storms to be offended. While it hummed, she piped neat shingles of icing onto a gingerbread roof, the icing setting in tiny scallops. The radio in the corner murmured a string of old carols, the kind that sounded like warm mittens. Maggie burst through the door with her coat unbuttoned and her cheeks pink from the walk. She had been Holly's friend since they had traded jelly beans in kindergarten and agreed that the white ones tasted like disappointment. "It smells like heaven in here," she declared, leaning over the counter to look at the gingerbread neighborhood. "I could cry." "Please do not," Holly said, laughing. "The icing is precarious, and your tears would cause a landslide." Maggie grinned, then lowered her voice into the tone reserved for delicious news. "Did you get the email yet?" "I was just pulling it up," Holly said. "Hold your breath." "No, wait, do not. You pass out too easily." The inbox blinked to life. There it was, subject line, festive and earnest, holiday festival updates, sponsor announcement, booth map and schedule. Holly clicked. The message filled the screen with bullet points and bolded lines. She skimmed for the important pieces. The gingerbread contest would begin at noon on the first day. Cocoa stand permits would be issued tomorrow at dawn, and her eyes snagged on the sponsor announcement. The letters seemed to darken of their own accord. "We are pleased to welcome our new presenting sponsor, Carter and Company, represented by Nicholas Carter, who will be joining us for planning and on-site events." Warmth dropped out of the room. The oven still shone, the radio still hummed, the cocoa still perfumed the air. But inside, Holly a cold spread like frost on glass. Maggie watched her face and stilled. "What?" Holly swallowed, set the piping bag down, deliberately, and read the line again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder. "It is Carter and Company," she said carefully. "Nicholas Carter." Maggie's eyes widened the way stars do when the sky finally turns dark enough. "Nick." "Holly? Nick?" Holly nodded, tasting a name she had not spoken out loud in years. Nicholas Carter. The man who once knew her favorite mug and the exact ratio of cinnamon to sugar she preferred on a churro. The man who had asked her to marry him under the old spruce behind the bakery, breathless and grinning and full of plans, and then, months later, had left town chasing investors and glossy dreams, taking their future with him like a suitcase he had packed without leaving a note. Holly had learned to stop thinking of him in narratable terms. It was easier to file away a heartbreak as an event rather than a person with a laugh that still owned a corner of her memory. "He is sponsoring the festival," Holly said, each word wrapped in the calm she had practiced for years. "He will be here." Maggie rounded the counter and squeezed her shoulders. Flour be damned. "Do you want me to set the ovens on incinerate?" "I can make it look like an accident." Holly snorted despite the ice in her stomach. "You cannot even make toast without starting a small emergency. Please do not burn down my livelihood because a man remembered our zip code." Maggie's grin curved, then softened. "What do you need?" Holly looked at the gingerbread houses, at the sign leaning against Flour, at the recipe box with the red ribbon nestling inside. She had built a life around the steady rituals of butter and sugar, around early mornings, and the faithful applause of the bell when customers came in from the cold. She was not going to let a name in an email shake that. "I need to finish the roofs," she said, reaching for the piping bag again. "I need to make a vat of peppermint fudge and about 1,000,000 marshmallows. I need to show up for this town the way it has always shown up for me. And if Nicholas Carter wants to step into my kitchen, he can wait like everybody else until I am done with the tray I am holding." Maggie bowed because an audience should honor a declaration when it is made without shouting. That is my girl. "Also, I volunteer as first marshmallow tester." "You always do," Holly said, squeezing icing in a steady line along a gable. Her hands knew what to do. Her heart would learn. "Hand me that tin of sugar pearls." Maggie obeyed, then glanced at the laptop again, curiosity nibbling. "He is coming for planning meetings." Holly skimmed the schedule, jaw tightening. "There is a sponsor walkthrough at noon tomorrow." "Of course there is." "Greta from the tourism board will bring him by the booths to align on vision." She made air quotes with the hand that was not holding a knife, and even that looked tidy. "I will be aligning on hot cocoa." Maggie exhaled a breath that looked like fog in winter. "Okay, we will plan. You will have armor, perfect hair, your grandmother's earrings, and a first-served tray of shortbread that is technically for the committee, but can be weaponized as a peace offering if needed." Holly smiled, grateful for the battlefield spun into something gentle. Peace offering first, then maybe diplomacy by scone. "Exactly." Maggie straightened, full of pep and purpose. "Now tell me what else I can do before the lunchtime rush." "You can fold those pastry boxes and tie them with twine," Holly said. "And you can remind me that I am not a ghost in my own life." "You are decidedly not," Maggie said, already at the stack of boxes. "You are the warmest corner of it." Holly breathed into that. It was a sentence you could lean on. The late morning unfolded the way good mornings do, with the decisions that fit in the hand. She decorated roofs, dipped spoonfuls of glossy peppermint fudge into neat squares, and whisked cocoa into a cauldron that would become the first batch for the stand. Regulars came and went, bringing cheerful updates and news that the town square had received its wreaths. Mr. Lin finished his coffee and left with a paper bag of ginger cookies for his grandkids, promising to return at dusk to see the first test of the light curtain in the window. At the back table, the recipe box sat open, like a heart telling the same true story again. Holly lifted her grandmother's card for the gingerbread spice mix and kissed the corner for luck. The radio drifted into a carol her grandmother used to hum while rolling dough. For a moment, the ache that lived quietly in Holly loosened. She took the first tray of sugar cookies from the oven and felt the room answer with that soft whoosh of heat and sweet. The bell chimed. A couple stepped in, brushing snow crystals from their shoulders, tiny scouts ahead of the storm. Snow had begun while she worked, gentle as a promise. It held the town in a hush that wasn't silence, just the world listening harder. Holly boxed pastries, slid pies across the counter, tied ribbons, smiled till her cheeks were peppermint warm. And beneath the practiced rhythm, her mind rehearsed the sponsor walkthrough, imagining how she would stand, what she would say, how she would keep her voice steady if a familiar laugh folded itself into the doorway. After the lunch rush melted away and the oven light blinked its soft half-hour warning, she paused. Outside, flakes fell in earnest now, dotting the pane with cold stars. The square's lampposts wore scarves like dignified old men. A child in a blue hat twirled until her mother laughed. Holly pressed her palm to the glass and let the cool seep into her skin. The bakery hummed behind her. The future hovered like snow. She thought of the man who had known exactly how she took her cocoa. 2 marshmallows and a dusting of shaved chocolate, and how long it had taken to stop making it that way when she drank alone. She could not remember when her hands had changed the habit. Somewhere in the years between heartbreak and now, she had decided she liked 3 marshmallows better. She smiled just for herself and turned back to the work table. There were stars to sugar and roofs to shingle, cocoa to whisk and ribbons to tie. There was a festival to greet, a town to warm, a promise to keep. And if Nicholas Carter walked through her door tomorrow with the snow at his back and the old city polish on his smile, well, Holly would meet him in the home she had made, hands sugared and shoulders squared, and she would show the season how a heart can be steadfast and soft at the same time. She reached for the next gingerbread house, steadied it with tender fingers, and set the first scallop of icing along the eave. Outside, the snow fell harder, each flake a small, bright possibility drifting toward the ground. Chapter 2. The Man Who Left. The morning light slid through the frosted windows of Sweet Hearth Bakery like a blessing, though Holly felt more like it was a dare. She had been up since dawn, rolling out pie crusts and whipping cream with a determination that bordered on stubbornness. If she kept her hands busy, maybe her mind would stop circling the same words from the email. Sponsor, walkthrough, Nicholas Carter. By mid-morning, the bakery bustled with warmth and chatter. Locals stopped in to collect loaves for supper, or to ask after the gingerbread contest. A group of children pressed their mittened hands against the display case, arguing about which snowflake cookie had the most sprinkles. The oven glowed. The bell above the door chimed often enough to sound like a carol, but beneath the festive hum, Holly's nerves prickled like pine needles. She had braided her hair into a neat crown, pinned on her grandmother's silver snowflake earrings, and chosen the red sweater that made her feel like she could stand her ground. Her armor, Maggie had called it. Still, every time the bell rang, she braced herself, wondering if this would be the moment when Memory walked in wearing polished shoes. The moment finally came. At exactly noon, the bell gave its familiar bright note, and the hush of cold air followed. Holly turned with a tray of fresh cranberry scones balanced in her hands, and there he was, Nicholas Carter. The years had pressed refinement into him. His dark hair was trimmed close, his coat cut from sleek gray wool, his shoes gleaming even after the snowy street. He carried himself with the ease of someone who had learned boardrooms and big city dinners. But his eyes, hazel flecked with gold, were the same ones that had once studied her face by the light of the bakery's ovens, memorizing her the way other men memorized maps. For a heartbeat, the past and present layered over each other. The boy who had knelt under the spruce with a velvet box, and the man who now stood in her doorway, successful and out of place, and somehow still hers to recognize. Holly, he said, her name leaving his lips like it had been waiting. Her hands almost faltered on the tray, but she steadied it and set it firmly on the counter. "Mr. Carter," she said, the formality crisp as sugar glass. Greta from the tourism board bustled in behind him, cheeks flushed, scarf trailing like a banner. "Here we are. Holly, you know our new sponsor, of course. Nicholas has been so generous, helping us expand the lights display, cover insurance for the ice rink, even funding the choir stage." She clasped her mittens together in delight. "It is going to be our grandest festival yet." "Wonderful," Holly said, arranging scones in their basket with precision. "The town deserves it." Nick smiled, and the edges of it were careful. "Your bakery looks the same." "It has not needed changing," she replied. Maggie slipped in from the back with a tray of cookies, catching the tension instantly. She gave Holly the kind of look that could launch 1,000 alibis, and then beamed at Greta. "Would anyone like cocoa?" "On the house. 3 marshmallows, because we are feeling generous today." Greta accepted with cheer, bustling towards the table by the window. That left Holly and Nick near the counter, the air between them thick with sugar and things unsaid. He gestured toward the gingerbread houses, lined neatly on the work table. "Still the reigning champion, I see." "They are for the contest," she said. "Sweet Hearth has entered every year since it began. Tradition matters here." His eyes softened, regret flickering across them like candlelight. "I remember." Holly kept her posture even. "I am sure you remember many things." The bell chimed again, sparing them from silence. Mrs. Lindstrom entered, snow caught in the curls of her scarf, and headed straight for the display case. Holly moved to help her, grateful for the ordinary rhythm of boxes and ribbons. Yet she felt Nick's gaze linger, steady as snowfall. When Mrs. Lindstrom departed with a cheerful wave, Holly turned back to find him closer, his voice low. "I did not come back to stir old wounds, Holly. I came because this town deserves more than it has had, and maybe because I realized I have been away too long." Her chest tightened. She wanted to ask, why now? Why after all these years? But the words snagged on pride. Instead, she smoothed the edge of her apron. "The town will take your sponsorship, but that does not mean I have to take your explanations. Nick nodded, as if he had expected the frost. Fair enough. He slipped a card from his pocket and set it on the counter. His name gleamed in embossed silver, in case you need anything for the festival booths, logistics, permits, or if you just want someone to carry crates. Before she could answer, Greta returned with her mittens and her cheer. Ready for the next stop? We have to check on the choir practice before dusk. Nick inclined his head to Holly. Thank you for the cocoa. You did not drink any, she said. His smile tilted, faint and wistful. I remember how you take yours. Then he followed Greta out into the snow, leaving the bell to chime behind him and the bakery to breathe again. Maggie sidled over, wiping her hands on a towel. Well, that was festive. Holly let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was survivable. Barely, Maggie said, peering at her. Do you want me to trip him tomorrow during the booth setup? Nothing serious, just enough to humble the shoes. Holly laughed, the sound half relief, half ache. No, the festival is not about him. It is about the town, about joy, about gingerbread and lights. And maybe, Maggie said gently, about second chances. Holly shook her head and busied herself with sugar cookies, though her hands trembled faintly. Outside, the snow fell thicker, cloaking the square in soft white. And though she tried to push the thought away, one truth settled deep as flour in her bones. Nicholas Carter was back, and no amount of sugar could keep her heart from remembering. Chapter 3, Mixing Memories. The next day dawned bright and sharp, the sky a pale winter blue that promised fair weather for the festival. Holly rose before the first streak of light touched the mountains, slipping into her boots with the sleepy determination of someone who had far too much to do and no time to dwell on old heartbreaks. She whisked batter, kneaded dough, and dusted counters with flour until the bakery's windows glowed from within like lanterns. By the time she stepped into the town square, her arms laden with boxes of gingerbread and tins of cocoa mix, the festival was already coming alive. Evergreen garlands looped from lamppost to lamppost, wreaths dotted storefront doors, and children in woolen hats darted between stalls, giggling at the sight of the ice rink forming under the morning sun. Holly breathed it all in, the crisp air, the sound of hammering from the stage, the scent of pine drifting from a nearby stall, selling fresh-cut boughs. This was her favorite time of year, the season when the town wrapped itself in joy. She set her boxes on the long wooden table assigned to her, brushing snow from its surface. Maggie, bundled in a green coat with a ridiculous pom-pom hat, appeared at her side with a thermos in hand. I brought caffeine, Maggie declared, thrusting it at her. And possibly courage, depending on how strong I made it. Bless you, Holly murmured, sipping gratefully. The hot coffee warmed her throat, but her nerves still prickled, because today she wasn't just setting up her booth. Today she would have to share space with Nicholas Carter. As if the thought had conjured him, his voice carried across the square, calm, familiar, dangerous. Holly, Do you need a hand with those crates? She turned, and there he was, hands bare against the cold, as he lifted a box from her stack as easily as if it weighed nothing. His coat was dusted with snow, his scarf a neat charcoal gray, but his eyes held the same warmth they always had, an echo of summer nights and shared laughter. I have it covered, she said briskly, snatching another box before he could. You always did, he replied, setting the crate down gently. But it doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. Holly ignored the way her chest tightened. This is my booth. My bakery's name is on the sign. I intend to make sure it looks perfect. Nick smiled faintly, not arguing. Instead, he straightened one of the garlands, looped along the edge of the table. His fingers brushed hers for the briefest second, a spark so quick and familiar it made her breath catch. Maggie, noticing the tension, clapped her gloved hands. Well, I will just go check on the choir rehearsal, she said, backing away with a grin far too mischievous for the situation. You two have fun arranging marshmallows. Holly shot her a glare, but Maggie was already gone, swallowed by the bustle of the square. Nick cleared his throat, pulling his scarf tighter. I volunteered to help Greta with the cocoa stand coordination. Looks like we will be neighbors. Of course he had. Fate, Holly decided, had an unkind sense of humor. They worked in silence for a while, setting up jars of cocoa powder, trays of gingerbread cookies, and rows of peppermint sticks tied with ribbon. Holly arranged marshmallows in glass bowls, her fingers steady, even as her pulse wasn't. Finally, Nick spoke. Do you remember the year we burned the first batch of gingerbread? She glanced at him, startled. You mean the year you forgot to set the timer? He laughed, the sound soft and low. I was too busy watching you dance around the kitchen to the carols on the radio. Heat rushed to her cheeks, uninvited. Well, you ruined 2 trays. And you saved the day, he said, his smile carrying a gentleness that made it hard to look away. You always did. Holly busied herself with the cocoa ladle, but memories unspooled anyway. Nights spent shoulder to shoulder in the bakery, stealing tastes of frosting, laughing until flour dusted their hair like snow. Those were the moments that had once convinced her forever was possible. As the morning rolled into afternoon, customers began to wander the square, lured by the scent of cocoa and gingerbread. Holly slipped easily into her rhythm, smiling, handing out cups, taking compliments about her cookies. And beside her, Nick worked without complaint, carrying trays, restocking marshmallows, even charming the children by drawing silly faces in cocoa foam. Against her will, Holly felt her guard soften, watching him crouch to tie a child's scarf tighter, or hearing him tell Mrs. Lindstrom that Sweet Hearth still made the best gingerbread in town, chipped away at the frost she had built around herself. When a lull came, Nick leaned against the booth and exhaled. I missed this, he said quietly. The lights, the snow, the way everyone knows everyone. The way this town feels like home. It is home, she said, more sharply than she intended. You were the one who left. His expression faltered, pain flickering in his eyes. But before he could reply, a group of children rushed up, demanding cookies, and the moment slipped away like snow melting in a palm. By dusk, the square sparkled with lights, and the choir filled the air with carols. Holly handed out the last cup of cocoa, her fingers brushing Nick's as he reached for the empty tray. That single touch sent a shiver down her spine, as familiar as it was dangerous. When the crowd thinned, he looked at her, his voice low. "Holly, we should talk, really talk." Her heart beat hard enough to echo in her ears. She wanted to say no, to remind him of the years he had been gone, of the heartbreak he had left behind. But another part of her, the part that remembered his laughter, his steady hands, his warmth on winter nights, hesitated. "Maybe," she said at last, pulling off her apron and dusting flour from her hands. "But not tonight." Nick nodded, acceptance in his eyes, though hope lingered there too. "Then tomorrow, I will be here." Holly turned away, gathering the trays, hiding the trembling of her fingers. Outside, snowflakes drifted down, catching in her hair, melting on her lashes. She told herself it was only the cold that made her shiver. But as she closed the bakery door behind her that night, she knew the truth. The snow wasn't the only thing returning. Chapter 4. Cracks in the Frost. The morning of the gingerbread contest broke crisp and glittering, the kind of winter day that painted frost on every window pane and turned the whole town into a snow globe. Holly woke early, her nerves jittering like sleigh bells. Today was always the bakery's proudest moment, the culmination of weeks of kneading and decorating. But this year, her pride was tangled with something else entirely. An ache she had worked years to bury, and a man determined to unearth it. She tied on her grandmother's apron and checked the trays one last time. Rows of gingerbread cottages gleamed with sugar windows and gumdrop chimneys. Icing piped in delicate swirls frosted the roofs, and candy canes arched across the little paths like cheerful sentinels. Each detail was precise, each choice careful, because baking was more than sugar and flour. It was control, and Holly needed every ounce of it. By mid-morning, the town square bustled. Booths brimmed with cocoa and candied apples. The choir's rehearsal drifted like snowflakes through the air, and families pressed close to admire the gingerbread creations on display. Holly arranged her houses with steady hands, smiling at customers, though her heart thumped unevenly. Nick arrived not long after, helping Greta string last-minute lights across the contest tent. He wore a wool coat the color of smoke, his scarf loose around his neck. He looked at home among the laughter and carols. But when his eyes found Holly, the easy polish softened. For an instant, she saw the boy she used to know, the one who had stolen gumdrops from her decorating tray and kissed her behind the spruce tree when no one was watching. She forced her gaze back to the cookies. She would not let him rattle her. The contest began with cheers. Judges strolled from booth to booth, clipboards in hand, pausing to admire spun sugar sleighs and licorice fences. When they reached Holly's table, she straightened, explaining the blend of spices her grandmother had perfected, the way she had tempered the icing for sharper edges. The judges murmured appreciatively, jotting notes, and Holly felt pride bloom despite the nerves. Then came the accident. A sudden gust of wind rattled the tent, sending a cascade of snow from the roof. One of the supporting poles shuddered. Before anyone could react, the corner of the tent sagged, and the edge of Holly's table tilted. A row of gingerbread houses wobbled dangerously. She lunged forward, catching one with her hands, but another slid toward the ground. In the chaos, Nick was there, steady, quick, his arms bracing the table, his body shielding the display. He caught the sliding house just before it shattered on the snowy floor, holding it with the care of something priceless. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then applause. Children cheered. Someone shouted, "That was close." Holly clutched the gingerbread in her hands, her breath ragged. "You," she began, then stopped, shaken. Nick set the house back gently, meeting her eyes. "I wasn't about to let you lose something you worked so hard for." Her throat tightened. Gratitude tangled with frustration. Because yes, he had saved her gingerbread. But hadn't he once broken something far more fragile? The judges resumed, declaring Holly's display one of the finest, but she barely heard them. Her mind spun with the image of Nick's hands catching what would have fallen. Later, after the tent had been secured and the festival moved smoothly again, she found him behind the booth, adjusting a string of lights. Snow clung to his shoulders, and his breath misted in the cold air. "Why did you leave?" The words burst out before she could stop them. They hung there, raw and sharp, white in the winter air. He froze, his hand stilling on the light cord. Slowly, he turned to face her. His hazel eyes held weariness, regret, and something softer beneath, because I thought I had to prove myself. I thought leaving this town, leaving you, was the only way to build the life we dreamed of. I was offered a partnership in the city. It felt like the kind of chance you don't say no to. And saying no to me was easier. Her voice cracked, but she kept her chin high. No. His answer was immediate, fierce. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the worst mistake. I told myself I would come back once I'd made something of myself, once I could give you everything you deserved. But when I finally looked up from all the noise and ambition, years had gone by, and you were gone from my life. Snowflakes drifted between them, melting before they touched the ground. Holly wrapped her arms around herself, her breath trembling. "You didn't even ask me what I wanted." "You're right," he said softly. "I was young and arrogant and blind. If I could undo it, I would. But I can't. All I can do now is tell you the truth and hope you'll believe me when I say I never stopped loving you. Not for a day." Her heart thudded painfully, torn between anger and longing. She thought of the sleepless nights after he left, the way she had poured herself into the bakery to stitch over the hurt. She thought of how carefully she had built her life without him. And yet, here he was, still knowing exactly how to catch what mattered. Before it shattered, you can't just walk back and expect things to be the same, she whispered. "I don't," he said. "I don't want the same. I want a better. I want us, but wiser, kinder, if you'll let me." Silence stretched, filled only by the murmur of festival goers and the faint strains of a carol drifting from the choir stage. Holly looked away, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Forgiveness wasn't simple, trust wasn't quick, but her heart, traitorous thing, softened despite itself. Maggie appeared just then, cheeks flushed from the cold. The cocoa line is wrapped halfway around the square. "Holly, we need you." She glanced between them, reading the tension instantly, then added with a pointed look at Nick, "You too." The crisis pulled them back to action. Side by side, they ladled cocoa, refilled marshmallow bowls, and soothed impatient customers with jokes. Their hands brushed more than once, and each time it felt like a promise neither dared put into words. By evening, when the line had dwindled and the square glowed with lantern light, Holly leaned against the counter, exhausted but strangely lighter. Nick handed her a cup of cocoa, 3 marshmallows floating on top. "You remembered," she said quietly. "I always did," he answered. Holly sipped, warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time in years, the taste wasn't bittersweet. It was simply sweet. Chapter 5. Snowflakes and Second Chances. The night of the festival finale arrived like a page from one of Holly's grandmother's storybooks, every detail shimmering, every moment poised to matter. The square glowed with 1,000 twinkling lights, draped across rooftops and strung from lampposts. Evergreen boughs perfumed the air, mingling with the sweetness of roasted chestnuts and the deep, rich scent of cocoa drifting from her booth. Music floated everywhere, carols from the choir, laughter from children skating on the ice, the steady murmur of friends and neighbors bound together by tradition. And above it all, the sky stretched deep and dark, waiting for snow. Holly adjusted the scarf around her neck and smoothed the edge of her apron, though she had abandoned baking duties for the evening. Her booth, decorated with gingerbread trim and peppermint swirls, had been declared the unofficial heart of the festival. She was proud, but she felt restless too, as if something unfinished tugged at her. Nick stood nearby, speaking with Greta and a few of the committee members. His polished coat caught the light, but his laughter, unrestrained and genuine, fit this town more than any city skyline ever could. And every so often, his eyes drifted to her, lingering like a hand held out across the snow. Maggie appeared at Holly's side, cheeks flushed, her pom-pom hat askew. "You've done it," she said, gesturing at the bustling square. "Best festival yet. You should be proud." "I am," Holly admitted. Her gaze wandered, unbidden, to Nick. But pride doesn't untangle everything. "No," Maggie said softly, "but forgiveness might. Or at least the chance to try." Before Holly could answer, the choir's final song swelled, a carol that rose like prayer, voices weaving together until the whole square seemed to breathe in harmony. As the last note faded, a hush swept the crowd, and then, as if on cue, the first snowflake drifted from the sky. Gasps of delight rippled through the square. Children squealed, tilting their heads back to catch the flakes on their tongues. The snow thickened, soft and steady, cloaking the town in a white veil. Holly closed her eyes, letting one melt against her cheek. When she opened them, Nick was standing before her. The crowd blurred around them, laughter and bells fading until all she could hear was the sound of her own heart. "Holly," he said, his voice low but clear. Snow clung to his hair, softened his edges, made him look less like the polished man who had left and more like the boy she had loved. I can't change the past. I can't give you back the years I wasted. But I can stand here now, asking for a second chance, not because I deserve it, but because I've never stopped believing we belong together. Her breath caught. The world seemed to pause with her. You broke my heart, she whispered. You left me to pick up the pieces alone. I built this bakery from those pieces. I built my life from them. I don't know if I can hand them back to you. His eyes shone, not with pride, but with humility. Then let me help you carry them. Not to take them from you, never that, but to walk beside you, to be here in this town, in your life, however you'll have me. Snow swirled between them, catching in her hair, brushing her lips with cold kisses. She thought of the years she had spent refusing to taste cocoa the way he made it, of the way her heart had still leapt when he caught the gingerbread before it could shatter. She thought of her grandmother's words about promises, one to memory, one to joy. Maybe, just maybe, joy deserved its turn again. Slowly, Holly reached for his hand. His fingers were cold from the air, but warm in hers, familiar as the sound of the bell above her bakery door. One chance, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Not for the past, for now, for what comes next. Relief and wonder broke across his face in equal measure. One chance is all I'll ever need. And then, under the falling snow and the glow of 1,000 lights, Nick bent his head and kissed her. It was not the breathless, hurried kiss of youth, but something deeper, steadier, a promise written not in perfection, but in persistence. Around them, the square erupted in cheers as fireworks lit the sky, but Holly barely noticed. For the first time in years, her heart felt whole. When they finally drew apart, laughing softly, Maggie was standing nearby, with tears in her eyes and a triumphant grin. Well, she said, about time. Holly shook her head, cheeks flushed, and leaned against Nick's shoulder. The snow kept falling, the music kept playing, the cocoa kept warming cold hands. The festival was alive, the town was alight, and her heart, against all odds, was open again. Because sometimes the sweetest recipes weren't the ones written on cards or measured by cups. Sometimes they were the ones made of forgiveness, courage, and love, brave enough to bloom beneath snow. And as Holly stood there with Nick's hand in hers, snowflakes kissing her hair, she knew she was ready. Ready for joy. Ready for second chances. Thank you for listening to Moonlit Romantic. For Holly and Nick, winter was more than frost and lights. It was forgiveness found in cocoa and gingerbread, and the courage to believe that second chances can bloom even beneath the snow. If snowflakes and second chances warmed your heart tonight, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that love, like snowfall, can return softly and still change everything. Until next time, rest easy, dream deeply, and remember, the sweetest joys are often the ones we dare to taste again.